All right, everybody, it is 7:05, so we will get started. Thank you all for joining as more students trickle in. My name is Precious Osagerese, and I am the instructor manager here at the New Jersey Cannabis Training Academy. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evenings to join us for this webinar. And most importantly, thank you so much for being a student and participating in the New Jersey Cannabis Training Academy. We hope that the content you're learning is spearheading you in the right direction to launch a cannabis business or be a part of the New Jersey cannabis industry. And these Q&As are to help further build upon what you're learning and to have that communication in real time with our instructors who can not only give you the real deal, but can really laser focus into what you're discussing. So we're going to go into some house rules. I'm going to bring up our instructors, but again, just welcome and thank you all for joining. I do want to start off with some celebrations and wins. On top of putting your name and where you're from in the chat, if you have anything worth celebrating or worth shouting out, definitely feel free to put it in the chat. We are building a community here at NJCTA. We want to support you on your journey, and that means also bigging you up when you have a small wins, whether you just opened your application, whether you just hit submit on a section, whether you just received a conditional, go ahead and shout it out. No matter where you are in this stage, there's much to be grateful for. This industry, from my experience, is insane, but it's very rewarding. And we definitely want to celebrate you guys. So again, welcome. We know this process could be challenging, applying for adult use cannabis license, so definitely get ready. There are several people on this call, as I mentioned, in different application stages, but if you're following the training, if you're staying in your lane, and just being okay with where you are in the work level, it is what you put in is what you'll get out, and you'll get closer to your dream of submitting a license, opening up your cannabis operation, whether it's cultivation, whether it's a retail, whether it's delivery, and we want that for you. So here's how this Q&A is going to work. In a moment, I'm going to bring up our instructors who will introduce themselves. Again, this is for level 3. In level 3, we discuss proof of municipal support, which we know is uber important. We discussed real estate considerations as location is just as uber important. And we also talked about zoning. So we have 3 of the best in the game, point blank, period, as our instructors here at NJCTA who are here to debunk some of that information and provide you further clarity. So we'll start going through the pre-submitted questions that were sent during the registration, hence why it's super important to make sure that you are putting in some thoughtful questions in those pre-submissions because we will get to those. And the Q&A box is open during this webinar. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box. Feel free to utilize our chat as we're having our conversations, and we will try to get to those as soon as possible. The types of questions you want to ask are definitely around this topic. We don't have a lot of time, so please get right to it. I would love to hear about everyone's journey, and there will be a time for that. But let's keep our questions pretty specific and pointed, just so that everyone can kind of get an answer. I think that's about it for housekeeping. Again, we don't expect, as you're going through this training, to have all the answers, hence why we are here. But other than that, I will now toss it over to our instructors who can give us their intros. I'm going to bring up Stephanie Thomas, Rosemary Molino Matos, and Charles Latini as our level 3 instructors. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
We're matching, except for Chuck. Chuck, you're on mute as well.
I'll get there.
And instructors, feel free to jump into the chat as well as to the Q&A box as you see. But I'll start it over with one of the first people you see in the CTA, which is Rosemary. Rosemary, give us a brief intro.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rosemary Molino Matos. I'm an attorney practicing in the cannabis space since 2018. I represent applicants in all phases of the application process, from starting their entity through the licensing and then post-licensing when they're operational. I also represent the city of East Orange, the Board of Cannabis Control there, and I'm happy to be here and answer any questions you may have on the municipal front.
Thanks. Next, I'll pass it over to you, Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Thomas. I'm a real estate agent that focuses on cannabis. My background is in commercial real estate and cannabis. I've been working in the cannabis space for about 20 years now, helping with applications, startup, and of course, finding real estate.
Nice. And last but certainly not least, Chuck.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. I am Chuck Latini. I am a practicing land use planner in the state of New Jersey. Been at this game now for about 25 years, working mostly with municipalities, but also private clients on planning and zoning issues. Participated in the first expansion of the medical program in 18, and I helped a lot of municipalities figure out how to navigate the game, with many more, obviously, that you all know to come. But I also helped potential applicants navigate this maze of processes that we all have to go through. So happy to be here.
Thanks. Well, thank you all. So we are just going to jump right into some of our pre-submitted questions. We'll jump into a conversation. And then again, everyone on the call, if you have some questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A box or into the chat. So immediately as students got on, one of the main questions we received is, on the municipal front, what are the processes to obtain a license on the municipal front? We know the state process, but each municipality can have different processes. So I'll start with you, Rosemary, and I'll jump to you, Chuck, if you can chime in. But what are some of those processes you're seeing? How do they differ from each other? And what can you do if you're looking to source multiple municipalities at this point?
Correct. Hi. So yes, every municipality is different, and there are no rules from the CRC on how they can run their program. Basically, they have broad authority to do, to allow it, not allow it, and then where it can be zoned and whether or not they're going to have an applications process. So it really depends on the municipality. And in the city of East Orange, we have a cannabis board. So there seems to be two systems. One where you can go directly to your council, your city council, and request, a resolution, or there's a process, right, with a cannabis board where you appear, you present an application. Usually there is a paper application. Most of them, I find in my experience, are very similar to the information that's requested from the state. So you'll see a lot of applications asking for like your community impact plan, your business plan, your social responsibility statement. Also, if they require you to have site control, there'll be questions about the property itself. So you basically really have to go to each town that you're interested in, check first of all to make sure that they're accepting applications and that they're still giving out resolutions, and then just figure out what the process is. A lot of them have ordinances that will guide you through it. But for the most part, it's a lot of research and just checking in with either the city clerk, or if they happen to have a board, whoever's running the board, just to determine what the process is for that particular municipality.
And Chuck, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, just a little bit. That was great, Rosemary. All the towns in New Jersey, like Rosemary said, that, sort of have, broad abilities here, but they are still governed by the municipal land use law. So there's certain basic parameters that they have to follow with regard to planning and zoning. So what I would suggest, at least right up front, is going to the web and going to their website and seeing where they're at. Some of their municipalities have their ordinances online. You can do quick cannabis searches on those ordinances to see if they're in or they're out, and generally their processes are laid out. But I think that's definitely a good place to start, or at least the easiest place to start, even before you start contacting the town.
And Stephanie, I know you are on the real estate side of things, but what are you noticing happening with municipalities in regards to finding real estate? Is the game pretty different, varying municipalities when it comes to location or the green zones that they're allocating?
Yes, it's really all over the map as far as what each of the municipalities allows, how many of each license they allow, and where they allow it. Some municipalities consider a dispensary similar to a pharmacy, and so they group it in with pharmacy zoning, which might be retail or professional office space. Other municipalities say we want it in our industrial zone. So you've really got to look at each municipality, where they want it and what kind of real estate might be available in those approved zones.
And can the new municipalities, this is kind of an off question, but you guys are getting me excited. Let's talk about some of these new municipalities that are jumping into the game. What opportunity lives with municipalities that are just opting in? And that's
I'm sorry. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, what was what opportunities? So the CRC, since, okay, so when I recorded our, the municipal support, uh, cohort, it was January. And at the time there were 202 municipalities that had opted in. I just checked today because I was curious to see how far that number had jumped. There's only 206. So the CRC now has on their website a list of municipalities that are opted in. I don't know how often it's updated, but as of today, there's 206. So there hasn't been that much movement in the past year. But one of the things, if you've watched my cohort that I recommend is there's always an opportunity to lobby a municipality, right, to get them to opt in. So if you're seeing that that there are no more resolutions, for example, if you're a micro, right, you're limited where you can go. It has to be in the town that you're, you know, the majority of the people on your application either reside in, right, or a neighboring town. So if you're limited in where you can go and the towns that surround you are not accepting, or you've tapped out, you've done your research and pretty much anywhere you can go is tapped out, the resolutions have already been given out, there's always the opportunity to lobby the town and convince them why it would be a good idea to opt in, and more specifically to opt in and allow you to get a license. And I actually had a client do this successfully, and she's going to be opening by the end of this year.
Nice. And Stephanie, Chuck, do you guys have anything to add on when it comes to approaching new municipalities or the opportunities that live with new municipalities?
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice that you were just given there, right there, and great opportunity. One thing you need to know when you come prepared to address those municipalities that may not have opted in but have been talking about it at various levels is to come with your A game, right? Come with specific things that you plan to do with the community as you're going in there. Not just saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to hire local," but reach out to some local organizations, have some conversations with people, even if it's just preliminary fact-finding missions. So when you actually go to the town, say, "Hey, I've talked to organization XYZ. I'm partnering with some people locally that maybe you've met along the way that they know personally." And when they start to hear people involved in your application and organizations involved in your application that that they know and are familiar with, the walls start coming down, and they more easily engage in conversations than you just saying, "Hey, how about me?" One thing that has been great is that all the operators that are up and running today are giving us some great groundwork to work with. There's very few problems out there in the cannabis world, and most of these municipalities have been scared of smells, scared of crime, scared of this, scared of that. None of that stuff exists. So coming with data and specific plans is a good way to approach it.
And Stephanie, is there a way to approach it on a real estate?
Absolutely. That's all great advice. And what I would say is, as you're approaching the town, have a real estate parcel or property in mind. Try and find that location before you even approach the town, and maybe even get it under a conditional contract so that you have the ability to convert to either a lease or a purchase if and when you get a license for it. By identifying the real estate and then lobbying for both your team and the location that you propose, giving the municipality a good argument as to why you, your team, and your location all make sense for the town, really kind of helps to give the town an argument in your favor as well.
And speaking of towns, is there some sort of list, or where can people start to go to figure out when municipalities are opting in? Is it kind of happening closed doors? Do you just have to really have your ear to the floor? How do you find out when municipalities opt in? And that's also a pre-submitted question.
I'm gonna drop into the chat there's a link to the CRC website. That's the most up-to-date list that's available at the CRC.
Nice, thank you. And I also recommend people just to, when you are a part of a town, you have to go to those town meetings. You have to be a part of that community to really get just the know on when things happen. Things change pretty quickly with municipalities in terms of meetings, times, especially when they're pushing through legislation. You want to be there at the very beginning of when legislation happens.
Yeah. Or you can also review a lot of the town meeting minutes and agendas for past discussion of cannabis and see what some of their concerns may have been in the past and be prepared to address those concerns when you approach them now.
Okay.
Yeah, you can even do searches of minutes and agendas to see how often and when they actually spoke about it, to give you an idea as to, you know, what the lay of the land might be. And then from there, adjust your game plan, whether or not you want to go proactively approach them saying, oh, I see you guys have been talking about it, or, you know, or you go in and say, hey, you spoke about it a year ago. Has anything changed?
Thanks. So now let's talk about the dynamic between like the state and the municipality, which I know sometimes gets muddled because municipalities can kind of like, in a sense, do their own thing. Meanwhile, there's this full-on blanket rules and regulations that we all have to follow. Firstly, who takes precedent and what are we seeing municipalities do different? Can they adjust square footage for cultivations? Can they adjust laws or regulations that are written by the state to just make it fit the municipality? Are they like waivers or variances that go against what state has happened? Can we really just discuss what like the state rules mean versus the municipalities rules and who takes precedence? And Rosemary, I'll start with you.
Sure. So, I mean, the state does not have the authority to change any of the, I'm sorry, not the state. The municipalities do not have the authority to change any state laws, right? What they can do, though, is govern how cannabis business operate within their municipality. So what does that mean? They can set zoning restrictions, right? Besides designating districts where the zoning can be, they can also determine, I'm sorry, I just got distracted with my son. They can also decide how many cannabis licenses they're going to allow, what fees are going to be incurred. That's pretty much, you know, that's would be the extent of what they can do. All of business operations, how many hours they can operate under and things like that.
Anybody else have something to jump on in terms of that versus municipality?
Yeah, so, you know, Rosemary touched on the legislation governing time, place, and manner, handing that to municipalities. Home rule in the state is a real phenomenon. Love it or hate it. We've tried to change it from a land use perspective many times over this past 25 years and even probably 50 years before that, and it seems to go nowhere. But municipalities can put very specific requirements in their zoning as to not only where but how you're going to operate. So they can look at things like how your site's going to be addressed, from the number of parking spaces to the landscaping to, you know, additional odor mitigation that they want you to put in place, things like that. So yeah, you unfortunately you have to abide by both state and local rules.
Right. And speaking of local rules, Chuck, we have a question here that said, what is the stance on selling things like wraps, cones, papers, or tobacco-based products in cannabis stores?
Well, that is all governed by the CRC and what they allow you to sell. I know tobacco products are not allowed to be sold in there, but you know, devices and apparatus for smoking product is sold within dispensaries. You know, if I know there's some things going on right now with the intoxicating hemp bill that's out there, which is completely separate but related, where you do see smoke shops who have been selling hemp products with tobacco, with all those things. And I think the general public, by and large, thinks that they're legal cannabis shops. They're not. But we'll see as the CRC comes up with, because they've been charged with creating regulations for those products as well.
Stephanie, I have a question for you. This is my question, not a pre-submitted question, but we're seeing a lot of dispensaries pop up near each other. And we're watching some of those implications take place in terms of, you know, now you're dividing market share, the value of those dispensaries, so on. How do new operators kind of really watch out for that? And what are some tools to kind of make sure you are in a good buffer green zone, but you're not next to a dispensary that may be opening up soon or is near you, even though it may be approved as a location? Is it smart to still take that location?
It really depends. There's something to be said for competition, and, you know, I've heard the term co-opetition in some other states where there are multiple operators in a small space and they're in competition, but they also work together. What I would suggest is if you're looking at a space or any location, if you can find out from that town and any neighboring towns, if any if any resolutions of support have already been issued and what the addresses are. So it's not just, oh, I see a dispensary open and operating at this location. There might be one in planning right now. So you would find that out by going to the municipality and asking what resolutions of support have already been issued. And you can even take it a step further. How are those entities moving forward? How far along are they? And again, review the meeting minutes and notes. You'll find some more information about what's in the plans for that town already and make a judgment based on that.
Yeah, if I can jump in, you know, it takes some digging, right? But the adage location, location, location has never been more prevalent than in this cannabis space, because, you know, you do only have 35% of the state in, and then the majority of the state's out. So that's why we're seeing a lot of operators on top of one another. So as you're looking at, and for my private clients on the cannabis side, especially dispensary, which I don't handle too much of because of this issue, but we do market analysis where we'll do the research like Stephanie's suggesting, which you can do a lot of yourself. We have access to mapping software and things and the like to make it a little bit easier, but plotting those out, looking at it on a map, seeing how the roads work, seeing how that flow in the region is going to go in and around that site. And then, you know, once you've gotten this location thing figured out and you're comfortable with the amount of competition around you, then you have to start thinking about how you're going to present your product too. So that's going to matter. That's where we're really starting to see operators who have 3 or 4 and 5 dispensaries on top of one another differentiating themselves with customer service and the vibe they're creating in the store and the products that they're now that we're seeing more cultivators on the market, more opportunities to grab different types of products, whether it's MSO or more craft connoisseurs, to really proactively and with great intention, you know, servicing the market in ways that maybe just is not just about recreation. Maybe you're focusing on an older population because your location is suiting that, and there's older folks that you might be able to target. So look at that, look at demographics as well, and who you might end up serving at the end of the day.
Thanks. I think that's all very important to notice because we are seeing a bunch of dispensaries now. I think we're well over 150, almost 200 dispensaries open in New Jersey and more coming. So that means that there is still opportunity, but all these things, municipal proof, local support, zoning, and real estate will be your juggernaut. So we have a question here that says, is there a quick way to get a cannabis license? But I'd like to rephrase it a little bit. Can we just talk about, if you had to walk the timeline of getting a municipal approval, let's start there. What has been like your average timeline you've seen businesses get municipal approval on the short end and then on the longer end?
I mean, it runs the gamut. I've seen everything from very quickly you know, within a couple of weeks, depending on the town, right, and the relationships, to a year or two out, and they're still waiting. I mean, it really is. There is no quick way to do this, unfortunately. It's a process because you're dealing with both municipalities and also with the state.
Rosemary, can you put a finer point on those ones that have gotten through and fairly quickly? Like what was in order for those things, those entities to become operational?
They were there, well, not operational. This was to get municipal support, right?
Oh, support.
Yeah,
Okay.
municipal support. So, you know, the ones that got it very quickly, they were there early. You know, they had been planning for this for a long time. They had all their ducks in a row, and it was just a matter of going in and securing that resolution of support very early. It's become increasingly hard.
And
Yeah.
some of the
So-
lengthier processes. Charles, I know you've seen it too. What have you seen?
I mean, you know, to gain an endorsement letter is far different than getting entitlements. Now, entitlements are taking that endorsement, going through the process of going to the planning board, putting your plans together, going through the 10-day public notice requirements that you got to put on place before you can even get to the board after you have a complete application. And then the 45 days, once they approve you, that somebody could appeal you. You know, that process in and of itself is a, you know, best case, a 3-month process. You know, and then, you know, if you don't have a store that's fairly ready to go, and ready to go means you were lucky and you found yourself a pharmacy or you found yourself a bank that was like just a cherry, right? That only required a little bit of work. If you didn't find one of those, you're dealing with major code issues with the construction departments, with plumbing, electric, and fire, and navigating that whole process, which could be at least, you know, 3 months in back and forth review of architectural plans. I've seen of the dispensaries I've worked with, I would say about a year to 18 months have been somewhat the average of getting through that process to the point where they're operational.
And Stephanie, I'd like to talk to you about the process of securing real estate. What have you seen timelines on folks being able to, you know, negotiate leases, get properties, make sure they're in the zone? What are some of your fast timelines and what are some of your longer timelines, and what really caused those differences?
Operators need to be able to make decisions quickly and have the money available before they even need to make that decision. What happens is a property will pop up as available and it's in one of the zones, and there are a handful of real estate agents that have ticklers on these property search sites, and something pops up. I get an email every day about what new popped up in New Jersey. And I check through real quick, and oh, lo and behold, I found one that's in an approved zone in a town that still has some allocations available. And I call my client and say, we have to move on this immediately. There was I had one of those instances, this was a few years back, where it was the day after Christmas, this thing popped up, and we submitted an LOI that afternoon to purchase the property. And the owner was a little taken aback. He's like, you've never even seen this property. You haven't been here. We're like, that's okay. No, we want it. We'll pay full price. He was very, very nervous about that. No, you have to come and see the property first. Okay, we'll be there tomorrow. We did. Resubmitted the LOI the next day after we had gone to see it and, you know, fulfilled his requirements, and then started working on getting the allocation for the town. That took another 3 months, and they were successful in getting that resolution of support, but they're still in the construction process. And this was 2.5 years ago. They spent a lot of time in the approvals process on their plans and construction and making sure that the facility was, you know, commensurate with all the other buildings near it. So Yeah, it can be long, it can be short, but you have to be prepared to jump on that property as soon as it pops up as available. The
Wow.
other way that you can look at things is go and look for things that are off market, not necessarily available, but possibly there's an opportunity that something will open. For instance, in like 2021, 22, a lot of dry cleaners went out of business because people weren't going to going into their offices anymore, didn't have as much dry cleaning to do. And so dry cleaning shops are on the decline and still are even to this day. So check a dry cleaning shop. Think about things that are starting to get a little long in the tooth, I guess, as businesses. About 20 years ago, there used to be tons of photo developing shops everywhere. They don't exist anymore. So think about things that may be on their way out, and there may be an opportunity for a new kind of retail or business to come into those spaces.
Nice. Thank you all for that. And just as a quick reset, as we are at the halfway mark, I just wanted to welcome all of our new students. Sorry, we did have tech issues earlier with folks finding the link. So thank you for joining us now. Again, we have our level 3 instructors here. We have Rosemary, Stephanie, and Chuck. Feel free to drop questions in the chat or in the Q&A. You can also let us know where you're dialing in from. All right, so we're just going to jump back into, we have a couple pre-submitted questions left, and then we'll get to the questions in the chat and that we can ask here. Can cannabis businesses become delinquent within a municipality? Let's say you did get the municipal proof of support and you just couldn't find the funding. Can they take that license back or proof of support back from you? And I'll start with Rosemary and then head over to Chuck.
That's a good question. So, I mean, presumably, yes. So in this, let's start with this. In the city of East Orange, we actually have written into the ordinance that your resolution expires. And that was done for the specific purpose of keeping track of these resolutions, right? So if there's a cap on licenses, we want to make sure that people are not holding on to resolutions they're never gonna be able to execute on. So after 6 months that you get a resolution, you need to, if you have not gotten final CRC approval, you need to come back and let the cannabis board know where you're at in the process, and then they'll recommend to the city council that you get an extension. Some towns do not do that. And so, like, for example, in the city of Jersey City, right now, there's no cap, although they're trying to impose a cap, but there is no cap. There's also no method of tracking where these applicants are. Unless they come back to the town and say, oh, by the way, which none of them are doing, I don't need your resolution anymore. I got one somewhere else, or I've decided not to pursue this anymore. They just basically sit out there and linger. So I definitely think that there has to be a mechanism in place to not necessarily rescind, but to keep tabs on where these resolutions are, especially when there's a cap. What I will say is, from the CRC perspective, they realize that this is happening. And so what they do before they issue the license is they do reach out to the municipality to make sure that there is still support there. So for example, if we have applicants in East Orange that are about to get approved by the CRC, I'm going to get a call from the municipal liaison asking me, so, you know, so-and-so had a resolution of support. They're about to get approved for a license. Do they still have your support? And then we'll say yes. You know, I mean, there's never been an instance of no, but they are following up to make sure that the support is still there.
Nice. Moving along a little bit to money, because we're getting a lot of questions in the pre-submitted questions about, well, how are you paying for all of these? And for those who do not know, there's a whole level in the New Jersey Cannabis Training Academy that talks about funding, how to fund your business, how to write a business plan, how to develop an income statement, how to develop a pro forma. That will be in level 5. So if you have not reached level 5 yet, all of your questions around the best ways to be prepared for funding could be there. But we'll touch on that here because I do have a couple of questions. I'll start with you, Chuck. Going through zoning, going through permits, having to get some of these things to get your business stands up could have a cost to it. It has a cost to it. What are you noticing businesses are allocating just to go through the build-out process and go through zoning, maybe from beginning pre-application all the way to end, and how well do they budget for that?
Well, it depends on the license category you're shooting for, obviously. You know, with dispensaries being probably the lowest of the investment needed, because just the size of the property and the requirements of the building itself are far less. So I mean, you're seeing to get through the planning board, with an attorney, with an engineer, and maybe with a planner or an architect. You're looking upwards of like $100,000 to just get through the entitlement process there. I've had some real horror stories on the cultivation side where it hit the 500,000 to 750,000 mark, because the town made us bring in all the King's horsemen and all the King's men. We had odor experts, we had the security experts, we had everybody, and then they dragged us to the planning board 12 times. And each of those nights went from 7 to 1 o'clock in the morning, and all those hours had to get paid for. So it was an absolute mess. That's the far extreme, right? But that was a big cultivator as well. So almost everybody under budgets, just about everybody. The entitlement process in New Jersey is not an easy proposition. The municipal land use law requires you to have an attorney when you're a corporation, and you have to be a corporation to get a license. So you're automatically hitting that mark. And then you're lucky enough to get through that process. Then your architect has to put together plans that can navigate that code office, which is really the technical review of things. And largely, and I've said this a couple different times to state reps, one of the missing pieces that we have, to yet to discuss, and maybe there's some discussions happening inside DCA, but is with the codes and standards guys and gals who are still handling cultivation as if it was a factory, not an indoor agricultural facility. So those requirements are so high for fire protection and sprinklers and all this other stuff, and you're like, wait a second, I got water running through this whole thing, now I got to do 200 grand worth of sprinklers as well. So you get hit with all these kind of wacky surprises along the way, and by and large, it's been a learning curve for everybody, right? So it's, but we still have a ways to go. I don't know if the others on the call have any more finer points on the costs.
Yeah, Steffi, I was gonna switch it up and see. Oh, go ahead, Rosemary. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say I agree wholeheartedly. Easily, I'd say many of my clients have easily, and we're factoring everything, right? Not just the cost of the professionals, but rent, right? Because at that point you'll have to have site control, so you have to factor in rent, construction costs. I mean, a small retail could easily cost you over $200,000 start to opening.
Yeah. And Stephanie, what about some creative ways folks are finding funding for real estate? Are there any creative ways outside of saying, you know what, I have to start paying rent on a property I'm not probably using right now? Or are there ways folks can like hold property for a time being?
I encourage people to try and do a flat rate holding fee for as long as they can get the landlord or seller to agree to such a fee, because you really don't know how long that timeline might be before you get municipal approvals and then get your state approval and then want to actually transact on the property. So if you can get a landowner or landlord to agree to a flat rate holding period during which you're not going to be using or occupying the property, but you pay them upfront a non-refundable fee for the privilege of demonstrating site control. I've seen people do on a monthly basis or just a one-time flat rate for a period of 6 months that can be then extended for another 6 months. Typically, though, I'm seeing somewhere around $2,500 a month, if it's a monthly fee or more, depending on the size of the property, and usually 10 to 20,000 non-refundable deposit for purchases to get you through the approvals period.
Yeah.
you really just got to negotiate with the owner. They're not going to give you a free chance at holding their property. You do have to pay something for it.
Yeah, you have to have skin in the game is what I
You
usually.
want, if you can, make all those fees applicable to your purchase price or applicable to your lease rate if and when that next step happens.
Nice. Thank you all for that. I want to head over to some of the questions we have here in the chat and in the Q&A because there's been a couple. First one is from KJ. He says, is mobile the best to start out with? And I'm assuming you're talking about delivery. Any thoughts on delivery and using that as a viable option to start your cannabis delivery first? I mean, cannabis business first?
Well, you still will need real estate. You'll just need a place where you're storing the delivery vehicle and all the inventory that you have in process. It does not have to be a retail storefront. It will have to comply with whatever the municipal requirements are for that type of license.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you might save some on the build out of the facility itself, because you're not bringing in customers and you don't need sophisticated lighting systems and stuff, but you still need some climate control because you don't want product to go dry or bad. But it's an interesting thought, one that I haven't really given much time to.
To jump in.
I would just add in terms of the applications process and fees, it's probably one of the, for delivery, it's probably one of the cheaper licenses to get, right? Because you don't need a lot of space for it in terms of rent and the SOPs, if you're hiring an application writer or other professionals, they're not as extensive as retail or cultivation or manufacturing. I do want to say one thing though, because I saw the question and it said mobile dispensaries, those are not allowed. So
Yeah.
you cannot have a mobile dispensary in the state of New Jersey.
Yeah, and I think we can clarify that a little bit. The Class 6 license for delivery only allows you to pick up from a dispensary and drop off. Dispensaries, delivery services right now cannot hold on to any inventory. But it's something that could be talked about a little later on. We're seeing that change happened in Massachusetts and some other states to make the delivery license a little bit more viable. And this next question, I think, kind of piggies back off what we were talking about in terms of what are some other thoughts. Even though Deshaun says, I know dispensaries are the most profitable. Sometimes. What are your thoughts on some of the other background licenses, such as distribution and wholesale, actually, which are just recently entering the chat? What are the municipal processes, or you can speak to the areas you guys work in? How are those licenses you see being plugged into the supply chain?
From my perspective, at least in the city of East Orange, we haven't had any applications yet for any of those. By the way, if anybody is looking for licenses or resolutions of support, there are many still available in East Orange. Just putting that out there. And their applications are open, but we're not seeing many. And if you look at the state website, they haven't approved many. I think maybe like 3 wholesale licenses and 3 distributors and 4 or 5 wholesales. It's not a lot. So there's not a lot of, I don't know if it's interest, but there's not a lot of people applying for them.
Definitely something to think about. I think the wholesale license is an incredible license if you know how to really look at the regulations. It's a connector between the top of the food chain with cultivators and manufacturers, and then dispensaries and retail. So something to look about. We also have a class on that. When we unlock level 9, you guys will be able to find out about an SOP for building out every license type, including wholesale. We had a question here. This was anonymous, but I'll still read it. It says, I feel like sometimes these webinars never really address someone who just wants to open up a small retail operation. And I wanted to bring that up because these things do sound grandiose, but this very much applies to the micro or small business owner. These numbers, facts, and figures where it can take up to $200K to build out a small micro is the reality of the cannabis dispensary. So I wanted to bring that to the group and just see, do you have any thoughts on, for someone who just wants to open a small operation, like, are they still having to compete with the big leagues, and just what sort of differences are you seeing between small mom and pops and our standard licenses?
I mean, in
Also,
many of the towns that I work in, we view a retail license as a retail license. And our, the caps on any of the numbers are the caps, despite, if you're, a big operation or a small operation. So unfortunately, it's hard to get the town's head around, um, you know, creating a differentiating the category in such a way that you're say, oh, we'll allow more because you're small. A retail shop's a retail shop in terms of zoning, and that's kind of how they view it. So unfortunately, unless we do some educating with municipalities on how to differentiate yourselves in that regard, you're going to be lumped into the bigger discussion.
yeah, and I would just add, from my personal perspective, I'm not a fan of micros. I feel that in principle, they were a great idea. This concept that, a smaller operation is more affordable, but in reality, they're not. And the restrictions on them make it, even instead of opening up barriers, they actually made it more restrictive, right? So you have a limitation on the number of employees you have a limitation on the location where you can be. You have a limitation on the size of your operation. And so I've always encouraged my clients, there is no minimum, right, for a standard, but you still have, and the other thing is, if you're a micro, you need to be able to convert, right, if you want to grow. And sometimes there's not an opportunity to do that. But I agree with Chuck. I think from a municipal perspective, doesn't matter if you're a micro or a standard, it's still a retail operation. And also from an application perspective, the work is the same for the professionals, right? Whether I'm writing a contract for a micro or I'm writing a contract for a standard, it's the same, right? If you're hiring an application writer, it's the same. They're the same SOPs, right? It's just a smaller operation. So you're not really saving money in that. And the other thing is rent, right? I have a client that rents 3,000 square feet in South Jersey for $2,500. And then I have another one that rents the same amount of space in Essex County for $6,500, right? Same amount of space, but location, right? The price is much more. So in reality, I don't know that having a micro business is really going to save you money. A lot of it is just about your business plan and how what you're proposing to do.
And I think a lot of the upfront cost is just because you're starting a new business. Not even just because it's cannabis business. I've seen pizza operators spend $250,000 to open a pizza shop that isn't all that fancy. It doesn't have gold paint on the walls. It's just a pizza shop, but that's what it costs, between the soft costs for engineering, architecture, permitting, zoning, etc., and then the actual hard costs of construction and hiring the professionals, buying the materials to build out that store. Just the bigger the store you're going to have, the more it's going to cost to build it out. And so I would encourage people to really think about, how big do you need this store to be, and how do you see this store or facility, if it's a grow or a manufacturing facility, how do you see it in 5 years? What will the competition be like? What will your business plan look like at that point? And what kind of space do you need now? Will you need then? And can you kind of match that up? We used to see a lot of really big dispensaries with a lot of waiting area and lines for, area for people to queue up and use touch screens. Do you need that? And I'd encourage you to visit some of these facilities and really figure out, how big do I need this? I encourage people to do it as small as they possibly can on the retail side.
All right. Last couple questions here before we wrap up. Some of these, actually, Rosemary, you opened a can of worms in East Orange to hearing that there's an opportunity there. I'll just do one broad question here that says, do you have to be a resident of East Orange to apply for these licenses? Oh, you're on mute, Rosemary.
Sorry, you do not. There's no requirement in the ordinance that you have to be a resident of East Orange. And because there is interest, I am going to put in the group chat the BCC's website. All of the licensing information is on that website, including resolutions that have been issued, the map, the ordinance, the application, everything you need is on that website.
Thank you. And all right, I'll make sure everyone here gets that website. One of the last questions we're gonna take here is, what are the advantages of taking level 3 courses, and specifically your courses? We'll start around, and Chuck, I'll go with you.
I mean, everything that we're touching on, we go into depth in each of the different subsections. There's a lot of interwoven pieces between our 3 presentations, but there's very specific attention that you pay, say, at the municipal planning and zoning level versus the real estate level or the other licensing processes that we go through. So, we spent a lot of time with the CTA staff. They did a fantastic job herding cats and trying to get us recorded and our presentations right. So I absolutely think it's a worthwhile endeavor to head down that road.
Rosemary.
I agree. And also the fact that we have been in the game doing this work. So you're going to get a lot of real life examples, especially I know in my presentation, and just the experience that we have. We're doing this work every day.
And Stephanie.
Yeah, I think with all of our courses, you're getting the straight story from the people that have done it before, without sugarcoating it. I know I speak for myself. I gave some real numbers in there, and they can be scary numbers, how much money you're going to need, that you're not going to get it back. You have to be prepared for that up front. And the more you're prepared for it, the less blindsided you are, the easier this process will be.
Can I add real quick, Precious, that
Sure.
many of us, when we embark in anything, whether it's a coffee shop or a cannabis shop, we don't know what we don't know. And I think what you're going to find in this is answers to things that you didn't even think that you had to ask questions about. And because those are the big blind sides, those are the real obstacles to getting over this hurdle, or the things that you don't know and you get hit in the face with down the road. So, it's the real deal information that you're getting here.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our level 3 webinar. Again, if you are on the portal, you can look out. We have our level 4 webinar coming up next week, and we'll also be tapping back in with our level 3 instructors. If you guys have any questions, feel free to hit us up through the portal or via email at CTA.SOS.NJ.GOV, and we'll answer more of your questions there. Till then, you guys have a great night. Thank you for joining us. And just a quick question I saw from Keith. It depends. You would have to look into the rules, the type of misdemeanor and or felony. There are certain restrictions with certain felonies and owning a cannabis license. That's written out pretty clear, and we can send that to you if you email us. And again, any other questions, feel free to email us. But till then, thank you everyone, and have a really great night.